Greetings, humans. Welcome back to the Black Pill, continuing the tradition. Here's another movie that came out along several years ago, and I should have posted a review then. I guess I wasn't the Black Pill back then. Anyway, but let's go. Midsommar. Midsommar, not subtle, on point. So, Midsommar isn't subtle. This is a horror movie. Basically, it's about a cult. Nothing really overtly supernatural seems to happen in the movie. Ari Aster also made Hereditary, and this film has some of the same themes, including some drug use. In the main story, some American graduate students get invited to a special festival in northern Sweden. The place is a commune where everyone is family. The host introduces everyone as his brothers and sisters. The Americans, a mixed bag of personalities, expect to see some usual old-fashioned living and hippie stuff, and addled with psychedelics and unbalanced by the unsettling summer sun. They're shocked and distraught by the first ritual of the festival, which is voluntary ritual euthanasia of the two village elders. Oh, and graphic stuff. Voluntary suicide escalates, of course, into increasingly bizarre and dangerous rituals. Nothing said or shown in any scene is irrelevant. Almost everything is quite clearly telegraphed, which doesn't make anything easier to take. The pace is almost achingly slow. This is not a film written to pander to the American need for action and explosions, but for the patient person, the payoff is deeply disturbing psychological horror. If that were all there was to it, I wouldn't bother to review it here. But of course, there's more. In the opening scenes, Danny, the protagonist, loses her family to murder-suicide. In these scenes, the movie makes it clear that you should take literally every word said or written and every image shown. These scenes are rough, emotionally taxing and disturbing, but they're also important. Danny's ambivalent boyfriend, Christian, can't hold her feelings. He's with her mostly out of guilt because it would be in bad taste to break up with her given what she's going through. And she is in constant crisis. The deaths of her sister and parents are just the latest crises, but they trap Christian effectively with her. In one scene, she wails out her anguish while he just holds her hand. He can do nothing. He seems discomfited by the display of emotion, but he doesn't appear to feel any empathy for it. This pattern continues throughout the film. In a later scene in the village, Danny expresses concern that someone has gone missing. A young man seems to have abandoned his fiancée there after they witnessed the ritual euthanasia. Christian says a few words about how awful it all is, but then changes the subject back to the questions he was asking a local. He fails to connect with Danny in any way. The villagers, though, connect deeply through their rituals. They're highly empathic. At the first meal together, everyone stands until it's time to sit, and then they sit together with no cues or prompts. When Danny becomes the May Queen, she leads this practice easily. At a dance, she knows the steps without hearing about them and speaks Swedish without learning it. A partner says, "It's a dance. We don't need words to communicate." The villagers breathe together more than once. They stand around touching palms, getting closer together. In one quite graphic sex scene, a group of women surround a couple as they couple, breathing with and amplifying the voice of the woman. And near the end, as Danny experiences great anguish, they do the same for her. Perfect empathy for her distress, something she's never felt before. This film uses some explicit therapy language. The host at one point asks if Danny has ever felt held the way his community holds him. I'm just back at the time of writing from an extensive visit to China, where I demonstrated some basic therapy skills to psychotherapists. Many of the activities going on around the commune seemed familiar because I led them myself in various counseling centers and universities. They're all about empathic connections at a pre-cognitive, embodied, language-less level. Uh, Look, the thing about doing therapy demonstrations is I don't speak any Chinese, and most of the people I'm working with don't speak any English. There's a translator, and I can sit and let the therapy player. They're a therapist, but they're acting in the role, right? And they can choose whether to say real stuff or do a role or whatever, whatever. Um, but they talk, and they might talk for like 3 or 4 or 7 minutes, and then they pause, and the translator will tell me what they said, which takes as long as whatever they said, and so it's between like 6 and 12 minutes later or something that I get to respond. And at that point, all the heat is gone out of that interaction. So while the person's talking, I'm going to invite them to sit down on the floor with me. We're going to take off our shoes, and we're going to loosen up. And then while they're talking, I'm going to like mimic their reaction. She touches her face, and I thoughtfully touch my face too. Not like mirror image, but very thoughtfully and carefully and consideredly taking their posture, sink down into what they're feeling. And the people that I do this with just report so much useful empathic connection that we can still get the work done despite these language barriers. And like, I come out of developmental disabilities where most of my clients could not describe their internal experiences or listen to a strategy of how to process a hard feeling or something. All that there is this belly to belly connection. And so it seemed to me that the people who wrote Midsommar had some experience of this. So in one exercise, maybe we pair off, stand facing a partner, hold up our hands and touch, palm to palm. For much longer than is natural or comfortable, we just stand together that way and do whatever is natural. For sensitive people committed to the empathic connection, this can have powerful results. It stirred emotions, forged connections. Man, it's easy to overanalyze a film, right? But this stuff is right out there in the open for you to see, and the filmmakers show you pretty boldly that they're not being subtle with meanings or symbolism. It's all right there. It's right there. So I left the movie house with strange feelings. Obviously, some of the elements are just horrifying. I won't be too explicit because the film is. At the same time, though, I loved the empathy that Danny received. It was beautiful. It was heroic. I find myself really loving these villagers, for all their dangerousness. They were considerate, carefully ethical. I mean, in a way you might not recognize, and caring in the extreme. I cried at the end because the empathic connections were so beautiful despite the disturbing nature of that closing scene. Like, I wouldn't mind living in this remote place, living simply, loving people dearly, and just being together. It's not the real horror of this is it's not impossible to rationalize a few murders every 90 years. for the joys of so beautiful a life. Black Pill out.